We do not have time for guessing games and stories about what the jet is telling you.
That system doesn't know this aircraft. I do.
It's dead. The words cut through the shimmering heat rising off the runway, flat and final, like a verdict no one could appeal. The F-16 sat motionless under the noon sun, its gray fuselage glowing against the concrete, canopy sealed, systems silent, as if the aircraft itself had given up. Around it, a ring of engineers and technicians stood frozen in a tension that felt heavier than the 30,000-pound machine in front of them. Laptops glowed in their hands, diagnostics scrolling in perfect green lines, every system reporting normal, every sensor insisting nothing was wrong. And yet the jet refused to breathe. Kyle Kramer, lead engineer, wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove and kicked the landing gear lightly, more out of frustration than force. We've run it 3 times. Fuel flow is good. Ignition sequence is clean. It should be flying already. His voice carried the sharp edge of a man whose confidence was beginning to crack. Just beyond the perimeter, a digital clock mounted near the control tower ticked down in bold red numbers. 8 minutes. That was all they had before the scheduled demonstration for a group of high-ranking officials, a flight that had been planned for months, a flight that now hung by a thread. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks paced beside the aircraft, his boots scraping against the hot concrete, each step faster than the last. "We don't have 8 minutes," he snapped. "We have maybe 5 before command starts asking questions we can't answer." His eyes darted between the jet and the engineers, searching for control in a situation that refused to give him any. The air itself seemed to hum with pressure, the distant whine of other aircraft echoing across the base like a reminder of what this one should be doing but wasn't. And then, almost unnoticed, there was a figure standing just outside the chaos. An old man. He didn't wear a uniform. No rank, no insignia, nothing that marked him as someone who belonged here. Just a worn olive jacket, faded jeans, and a small leather tool bag hanging from his hand, the kind of bag that had seen decades of use. He stood still, quiet, his eyes fixed not on the people, not on the screens, but on the aircraft itself. Watching. Listening. As if the silence of the jet was speaking to him in a language no one else could hear. One of the younger technicians noticed him first and frowned. "Hey," he called out, waving a hand dismissively. "This area's restricted. You can't be here." The old man didn't respond. He didn't move. His gaze remained locked on the F-16, tracing lines across its surface, lingering on places no one else had bothered to look twice. Kramer followed the technician's gesture and let out a short, irritated breath. "Seriously," he muttered, stepping toward the old man. "We're trying to fix a dead aircraft and now we've got tourists wandering onto the runway." The heat shimmered between them, distorting the air, making the moment feel unreal. The old man finally shifted his eyes, calm and steady, meeting Kramer's frustration without reflecting any of it back. "She's not dead," he said quietly. The words were soft, almost lost under the distant roar of another jet taking off miles away. But they landed. Kramer blinked, caught off guard for half a second before a scoff escaped him. "Not dead," he repeated, shaking his head. "We've got full diagnostics, full system checks, and 0 response. That's dead." He turned away, already dismissing him. "We don't have time for this." The clock ticked down. 6 minutes. The wind shifted slightly across the runway, carrying with it the faint scent of jet fuel and hot metal. The old man's grip tightened slightly on the worn leather bag, his thumb brushing over a spot polished smooth by years of habit. His eyes returned to the aircraft, narrowing just a fraction, as if something small, almost invisible, had just caught his attention. And while everyone else stared at the screens, waiting for answers that weren't coming, he took one slow step forward. The step was slow, deliberate, almost out of place in the frantic energy surrounding the aircraft, but it carried a weight that made the airman nearest to him instinctively move aside without knowing why. The old man stopped just short of the wing, his eyes scanning along the fuselage, not the obvious panels that had already been opened and checked, but the seams, the edges, the places where metal met metal with surgical precision. Around him, the tension continued to build, voices rising, keyboards tapping faster, as if speed alone could force an answer out of the machine. Kramer turned back just in time to see him closer to the jet, and his irritation snapped into something sharper. "Hey," he barked, stepping forward, boots striking the concrete with purpose. "I told you this is restricted. You need to step back now." The old man did not argue. He did not even look at him this time. His attention was fixed on a small section near the intake, a panel no larger than a dinner plate, secured perfectly, aligned so precisely that no one had questioned it. Except him. "Did you open this one?" he asked, his voice calm, almost lost beneath the distant hum of generators. Kramer followed his gaze and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That panel," he said. "It is sealed. Factory torque. Sensors behind it are all green. There is nothing there." He gestured back toward the glowing screens. "The system tells us where the problem is. That is not it." The old man crouched slightly, his movement careful, measured, as if respecting the aircraft rather than inspecting it. His fingers hovered just above the metal, not touching, feeling the heat radiating off its surface, the faint vibration that traveled through the frame and into the ground. To everyone else, the jet was silent. To him, it was not. "You are listening to the computer," he said quietly. "I am listening to her." Kramer shook his head, a smirk forming despite the pressure closing in around him. "It is not a her," he replied. "It is a machine. And right now, it is a dead one." Behind them, Lieutenant Brooks checked his watch again, his jaw tightening. "For minutes," he called out. "If this does not start, we scrub the demonstration." The words landed hard, heavier than any shouted order. Careers, reputations, months of preparation, all collapsing into a single moment that refused to cooperate. The old man finally reached down and touched the panel, just a light press with 2 fingers, enough to feel what could not be seen. For a brief second, the runway disappeared. The heat shifted. The air changed. In its place was a different sky, a different time, the deep thumping rhythm of rotor blades overhead, the metallic rattle of a machine pushed beyond its limits. His hands were younger then, steady in a way that came from necessity, not comfort, working against time, against failure, against the quiet understanding that if the machine stopped, people did too. The memory did. Not linger. It never did. It came like a flash and left just as quickly, leaving behind only certainty. He withdrew his hand and stood slowly, eyes narrowing just a fraction more. "It is not dead," he repeated, softer now, but with something underneath it that was no longer a suggestion. Kramer stepped closer, frustration spilling over. "Then what is it?" he challenged. "Because we have checked everything." The old man glanced once more at the panel, then at the aircraft as a whole, as if seeing the full picture where everyone else saw pieces. "You checked what the system told you to check," he said. "You did not check what it does not know how to tell you." The wind shifted again, hotter now, carrying the faint scent of burning fuel from another part of the base. The countdown clock hit 3 minutes. And somewhere behind them, unnoticed by most, a young airman named Bennett lowered his tablet slowly, his eyes moving from the flawless diagnostics on the screen to the old man standing beside the aircraft, a quiet unease settling in his chest as a single thought formed, clear and impossible to ignore. Something here was wrong. Not with the jet. With everything else. The unease did not stay contained. It spread, quiet and steady, the way heat rolls off the runway, invisible but impossible to ignore. Bennett swallowed once, his eyes flicking between the old man and the aircraft, then back to the tablet in his hands where every system still read perfect. Perfect did not feel right. Not anymore. He took a step back, just enough to create space, and lowered his voice as he turned slightly away from the others. His thumb hovered over his phone for a fraction of a second before he made the decision. Not up the normal chain. Not through the lieutenant. Somewhere higher. Somewhere that might actually listen. Behind him, the tension snapped again. Kramer had lost whatever patience he had left. "That is enough," he said sharply, stepping directly between the old man and the aircraft. "You are done. Step away." His hand motioned outward, firm, dismissive. "We do not have time for guessing games and stories about what the jet is telling you." The old man did not resist, but he did not rush either. He straightened slowly, his posture calm, his expression unchanged, as if the pressure that was tightening around everyone else simply did not reach him. His fingers brushed once more against the worn leather bag at his side, grounding, familiar. Kramer leaned in slightly, lowering his voice but not his tone. "You are in the way," he said. "And right now, that is the last thing we need." For a brief moment, their eyes met. Kramer saw nothing he could use. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just that same quiet stillness that had been there from the beginning. It unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He turned away first. "Brooks," he called out. "Clear the area. We are locking this down." Lieutenant Brooks nodded quickly, eager to regain control of something. "You heard him," he said, stepping forward, authority sharpening his voice. "Everyone not assigned to this aircraft, move back. Now." His gaze landed on the old man. "That includes you." The countdown clock dropped to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The numbers felt louder now, each second pressing down harder than the last. The hum of the bass seemed to fade under it, replaced by a growing silence that made every movement, every breath, stand out. The old man took a single step back, then stopped again. Not retreating. Just observing. His eyes returned to the same panel, the same line in the metal that no one else had given a second thought. As if the answer was still there, waiting. Across the runway, a black vehicle turned sharply onto the access road, tires whispering against the concrete as it accelerated faster than protocol usually allowed. No one noticed yet. All attention remained locked on the aircraft and a failure that refused to be solved. Bennett's voice came through his phone in a low, controlled rush. "Sir, I know this is not standard, but I need you to check a name," he said, stepping farther away, his back turned to the scene. A pause. Then quieter. "Eli Vance." The line on the other end did not respond immediately. The silence stretched just long enough to feel wrong. Bennett's grip tightened slightly. "Sir?" he asked. When the voice finally came back, it had changed. Sharper. Focused. "Repeat that name," it said. Bennett glanced over his shoulder at the old man, still standing there, still watching the aircraft like it was the only thing that mattered. "Eli Vance," he said again. Another pause. Longer. This time. The kind of pause that did not come from confusion, but from recognition. On the runway, Kramer signaled for another ignition attempt. "One more try," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "We are not losing this jet." The ground crew moved quickly, trained motions snapping into place, switches engaged, systems primed. The air shifted, a low electrical anticipation building as the sequence began again. The engine did not respond. Not even a flicker. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Final. And in that silence, the vehicle that had been racing across the base came to a sudden stop at the edge of the runway, the door opening before it had fully settled, a figure stepping out with a speed and purpose that did not match his rank, his eyes already locked on the aircraft, and then on the man standing quietly beside it. The moment the car door slammed shut, the sound cut through the runway like a command no one had heard yet but everyone felt. Heads turned, conversation stopped mid-word, and even Kramer paused, his hand still resting on the side of the aircraft as if the motion had been frozen in place. The man walking toward them did not rush, but he did not waste a single step. His uniform carried no ambiguity. 4 stars caught the sunlight, sharp and unmistakable. General Robert Hayes did not look at the engineers, did not look at the lieutenant, did not look at the aircraft first. His eyes went straight to the old man. And in that single glance, something shifted. Lieutenant Brooks snapped to attention instinctively, his voice tightening. "Sir," he began, already moving forward, "we are currently dealing with a systems failure, we have the situation, stop." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It landed with a finality that cut Brooks off mid-sentence. The general did not break stride as he walked past him, his gaze never leaving the old man standing near the wing. Kramer straightened quickly, wiping his hands on his uniform, forcing his posture into something more composed. "General," he said, trying to recover control of the moment. "We have run full diagnostics. The aircraft is non-responsive. We are preparing to, you declared it dead," Hayes said, finally shifting his eyes toward the jet for a brief second before returning them to Eli. It was not a question. Kramer hesitated, just enough for doubt to slip into the edges of his confidence. "Yes, sir," he answered. "All systems report functional, but the engine will not engage." "We have exhausted." "No," Hayes interrupted, calm but absolute. "You exhausted what you understand." The words hung in the air, heavier than any raised voice could have been. Around them, the entire runway seemed to hold its breath. The countdown clock continued in the background, now under 2 minutes, each second slipping away unnoticed by everyone except the ones who could not ignore it. Hayes stopped a few feet from Eli Vance. For a moment, neither man spoke. The contrast between them was sharp, rank and uniform against worn fabric and quiet presence. And yet, there was no imbalance in the space between them. Only recognition. "It has been a long time," Hayes said, his voice lower now, carrying something that was not authority, but respect. Eli gave the smallest nod, nothing more. "Long enough," he replied. Kramer's confusion broke through his restraint. "Sir," he said, stepping forward slightly, "with all due respect, we do not have time for this. The demonstration window is closing and we need to secure the aircraft." Hayes did not turn his head. "Step away from the jet," he said. Kramer blinked, caught between instinct and disbelief. "Sir." Hayes finally looked at him, and the weight behind his gaze made the question unnecessary. "That is not a suggestion," he said. Silence followed. Then movement. Kramer stepped back. So did the rest of the team, one by one, creating space without fully understanding why. Lieutenant Brooks followed, slower, his eyes shifting between the general and the old man, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he thought he knew. Hayes took one step to the side, clearing the path completely. "You have 2 minutes," he said, his voice steady, directed at Eli and no one else. "No explanation. No instruction. Just trust." The runway seemed quieter now, as if even the distant sounds had faded to give room for what was about to happen. Eli adjusted the strap of the leather bag on his shoulder and moved forward, not with urgency, but with certainty. The aircraft loomed in front of him, still silent, still waiting. And this time, no one told him to step away. The distance between Eli and the aircraft closed in silence, each step measured, each movement carrying a familiarity that did not need to be explained. The heat rising from the runway shimmered around him, distorting the edges of the jet, but his focus never shifted. He stopped at the same panel he had noticed before, the one no one else had questioned, and for a moment he did nothing. He simply stood there, eyes tracing the lines, feeling the presence of the machine in a way that went beyond readings and reports. Behind him, no one spoke. Kramer folded his arms tightly, jaw set, watching with a mix of skepticism and something he could not quite name. Lieutenant Brooks remained rigid, his posture perfect, but his certainty was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that matched the ticking clock now hovering just above 1 minute. General Hayes stood still, his gaze fixed, not on the aircraft, but on Eli, as if the outcome had already been decided somewhere beyond what anyone else could see. Eli set the leather bag gently on the ground and knelt beside it, opening it with care. The snap of the worn clasp was soft, almost lost in the stillness, but it carried weight. Inside were tools that did not belong in this place. Not because they were wrong, but because they were simple. Worn metal, edges smoothed by years of use, each piece shaped not just by design, but by experience. He selected one without hesitation, his fingers moving with quiet certainty, then stood and reached for the panel. Up close, the imperfection revealed itself. Not visible to the eye alone, not something a scan would flag, but a difference in tension, a slight resistance where there should have been none. He pressed lightly, then adjusted his grip, applying just enough pressure to test the alignment. The metal responded in a way only he seemed to notice. A fraction of a shift. Less than a millimeter. But enough. Behind him, Kramer leaned forward slightly, unable to stop himself. "That panel is sealed," he said, his voice lower now, less certain. "If you open it, you void the entire system integrity." Eli did not look back. "It was already void," he replied calmly. The words were not defensive. They were final. The countdown slipped under 60 seconds. The air felt tighter, thinner, as if the entire runway had narrowed to this single moment. Eli adjusted the tool in his hand and began to work, not quickly, not dramatically, but with precision so controlled it almost seemed effortless. Each movement was deliberate, each adjustment small, exact, guided by something deeper than instruction. For a brief instant, the world shifted again. Not away, but layered beneath the present. The hum of the runway merged with another sound, older, heavier, the steady pulse of a machine fighting to stay alive. His hands moved the same way they had then, steady under pressure, guided by instinct built over years no system could replicate. The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving only clarity. The panel loosened with a soft release, breaking the factory seal without force, without resistance, as if it had been waiting. Eli paused, just for a second, feeling the air, the machine, the silence around him. Then he reached inside. No one could see exactly what he did. There was no dramatic motion, no obvious correction. Just a small adjustment, a realignment of something hidden, something overlooked. He withdrew his hand, secured the panel back into place with the same care, and picked up his bag. The clock dropped to 30 seconds. He stepped back once, then stopped. "Now," he said quietly. It was the first time he had given an instruction. Kramer hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then something shifted. He turned sharply. "Run ignition," he ordered. The crew moved instantly, hands flying over controls, systems engaging once more. The sequence began. The air changed. A low hum built beneath the surface, deeper this time, stronger. And for the first time since the failure began, the machine answered. The hum did not stop this time. It grew. Low at first, almost uncertain, like the machine itself was testing the breath it had just been given back. Then it deepened, rolling through the fuselage, vibrating through the landing gear and into the concrete beneath their feet. Every head snapped toward the aircraft at the same moment. Kramer froze where he stood, his eyes locked on the intake as the sound built into something undeniable. "Hold sequence," he said instinctively, but his voice lacked conviction now, caught between control and disbelief. The engine did not listen to him. It continued. The whine sharpened, rising in pitch, the internal systems aligning, catching, locking into place in a way they had refused to do minutes before. Air rushed through the intake with a force that bent the heat waves around it, pulling the stillness inward and replacing it with motion. One of the technicians took a step back without realizing it, the pressure in the air shifting against his chest. "That is not possible," someone whispered, too quiet for anyone to claim the words, but loud enough to be felt. The diagnostic screens flickered, updating in real time, green lines scrolling faster now, no longer static confirmations but active responses. Parameters stabilized. Readings corrected themselves as if the system had finally found the path it had been missing. Kramer moved forward slowly, drawn in despite himself, his earlier certainty unraveling with each second the engine continued to build. "Increase to idle," he said, this time not as a command of authority, but as a test. The response was immediate. The engine climbed smoothly, cleanly, no hesitation, no stutter, just power returning exactly as it should have from the start. The sound filled the runway now, not chaotic, not forced, but controlled, precise, alive. Lieutenant Brooks stood rigid, but his eyes told the truth. He was no longer watching a malfunction being corrected. He was witnessing something he did not understand. The countdown clock hit 0. No one noticed. It no longer mattered. The aircraft had already answered. General Hayes did not move. His posture remained steady, his expression unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, a release of something held in check. He did not look at the jet. He looked at Eli. The old man had already stepped back, his bag in hand, his work finished before the engine had even reached full idle. He did not watch the result. He did not need to. Kramer turned toward him slowly, the question forming before he could stop it. "What did you do?" he asked, the words coming out quieter than anything he had said all day. Eli paused, just for a moment, his gaze moving once more across the aircraft, not with pride, not with ownership, but with recognition. "I listened," he said. The simplicity of the answer landed harder than any explanation could have. Behind them, the ground crew moved with renewed urgency, confirming systems, preparing for what had moments ago been impossible. The jet stood ready now, stable, responsive, waiting only for the final command. The air was no longer heavy. It was charged. And in that charged silence, something else settled in. Not relief. Not excitement. Respect. It moved through the group quietly, unspoken but undeniable, replacing the earlier doubt, the earlier dismissal, with something that did not need to be said out loud. Kramer exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping for the first time since the failure began. He looked at the aircraft again, then back at Eli, as if trying to reconcile the two realities that had just collided in front of him. The machine had not changed. The data had not changed. Only one thing had. And that was enough. The engine settled into a steady idle, a deep, controlled presence that filled the runway without overwhelming it, the kind of sound that spoke of readiness rather than struggle. No alarms. No hesitation. Just precision. The ground crew moved quickly now, their earlier uncertainty replaced with disciplined motion, checking panels, confirming readings, calling out numbers that finally made sense. Kramer stood still for a second longer, then turned sharply back to the team. "Prep for taxi," he ordered, his voice regaining structure, but not the same edge. Something in it had shifted. Less force. More respect for the moment that had just happened. Lieutenant Brooks followed immediately, issuing commands down the line, his posture still rigid but no longer driven by pressure alone. The operation resumed, but it was different now. Quieter. Focused. As if everyone understood they were stepping into something that had already been decided. Near the wing, Eli adjusted the strap of his bag and began to walk away, not toward the command group, not toward the aircraft, but toward the edge of the runway where the heat shimmer softened into distance. He did not wait. He did not linger. The work was done. General Hayes watched him for a moment before speaking. "Captain," he said without raising his voice. Bennett straightened immediately, stepping forward from where he had been standing, still holding his tablet like it might explain everything if he looked at it long enough. "Sir." Hayes did not look at him right away. His eyes remained on Eli. "You made the call," he said. It was not a question. Bennett nodded once. Yes, sir. A brief pause followed, not uncomfortable, but deliberate. Good, Hayes said. That was all. But it carried weight. Behind them, the aircraft began to roll slowly, guided into position, the nose turning with smooth precision as the pilot inside brought it forward. The tires moved across the concrete with a low, steady sound, the machine now fully responsive, fully alive. The demonstration had not been cancelled. It had been delayed by something no system could predict. Kramer walked a few steps closer to Hayes, stopping just short of formality. Sir, he said, choosing his words carefully, we ran every diagnostic available. There was no indication of a fault in that section. Hayes finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. That is because you were asking the wrong questions, he replied. Kramer held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, slowly. There was no argument left. No defense to make. Only understanding, arriving later than it should have. The jet paused briefly at the end of the runway, engines holding steady, awaiting clearance. The air around it shimmered again, but this time it carried energy, not tension. A voice crackled over the radio, clear and controlled, granting permission. The pilot responded, calm and precise. Then the aircraft moved. Faster this time. The engine note climbed, not struggling, not searching, but rising cleanly, confidently, building into a force that pushed against the ground and then broke free from it. The wheels lifted. The jet climbed. Smooth. Effortless. Exactly as it was meant to. Every eye followed it upward, tracking the arc against the sky until it became a distant shape, then a sound, then nothing. Silence returned to the runway, but it was not the same silence as before. This one held something inside it. Recognition. Kramer exhaled slowly, his eyes still fixed on the empty sky before he finally turned. He looked toward where Eli had been standing. The space was empty now. No trace. Just heat rising from the concrete and the faint outline of where he had stood. Where did he go? Brooks asked quietly, almost to himself. No one answered. They already knew the truth. He had never been there to stay. The silence lingered long after the jet had disappeared, stretching across the runway like a shadow that refused to move. No one rushed back to routine. No one spoke first. The moment had settled too deeply for that. Kramer finally turned away from the sky, his eyes drifting back to the aircraft's starting position, as if expecting to find some trace of what had just happened etched into the concrete. There was nothing. Just heat waves and faint tire marks already fading. He exhaled slowly, then looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers once, grounding himself in something real. Run a full system audit, he said, his voice steady again, but quieter. Everything. I want to know exactly what changed. The technicians moved, but their energy was different now. Focused, yes, but tempered. Careful. As if they understood that whatever answer they found would not fully explain what they had witnessed. Lieutenant Brooks stepped closer to the panel that had been opened, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. Seal integrity looks intact, he murmured. No visible deviation. He ran his hand lightly across the surface, searching for something, anything, that would confirm what had been done. There was nothing obvious. Just metal. Perfectly aligned. As if it had always been that way. It does not make sense, he added under his breath. Behind them, Bennett stood still, his tablet lowered at his side, no longer checking data, no longer searching for confirmation. He had already found what he needed. Not in the system, but in the moment. His eyes moved toward the far end of the runway, scanning the edge where Eli had walked away. Empty. Completely empty. General Hayes remained where he had been, his posture unchanged, his presence still commanding without effort. He watched the team for a moment, then turned his attention briefly toward the horizon where the aircraft had vanished. There was no need for acknowledgement. The result spoke for itself. Kramer approached him again, slower this time, without urgency. "Sir," he said, pausing just enough to choose his words, "who is he?" Hayes did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted once more toward the empty stretch of runway, then back to Kramer. "Someone who learned before the systems did," he said simply. Kramer absorbed that, his brow tightening slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of something larger than his own understanding. "He should not just walk away," Brooks added, stepping closer, his voice carrying a trace of frustration. "If he can do that, we need him here." Hayes looked at him then, directly. "No," he said, calm and certain. "You needed him today." The distinction settled in quietly, leaving no room for argument. Brooks straightened, his posture returning to form, but the certainty behind it had changed. Bennett took a step forward, hesitating only slightly before speaking. "Sir," he said, the name, it flagged immediately at command. Hayes nodded once. "It would." Another pause followed, heavier this time, filled with things left unsaid. The wind moved across the runway again, lighter now, carrying away the last traces of tension. The base began to return to motion, vehicles restarting, radios coming back to life, routines reassembling themselves piece by piece. But the shift remained. Subtle, permanent. Kramer looked once more at the aircraft's position, then at the panel, then toward the empty distance where Eli had gone. He saw something none of us did, he said quietly. Hayes turned to leave, his steps measured, his presence receding without losing its weight. "No," he replied without looking back. "He listened to something none of you could hear." The words stayed behind long after he was gone, settling into the space where certainty used to live, replacing it with something quieter, stronger, and far more difficult to ignore. The runway returned to motion, but it was not the same motion as before. Every step carried a trace of hesitation, not from doubt, but from awareness. The kind that lingers after something changes the way you see what you thought you understood. Kramer stood beside the aircraft's starting position a moment longer, then slowly walked back toward the panel, stopping just short of touching it again. He did not need to. He already knew he would not find an answer there. Not the kind he was looking for. The system logs would show clean data. The reports would confirm normal operation. Everything would align with what should have happened. But none of it would explain why it had not happened until someone else stepped in. He let out a quiet breath and looked down the runway, his voice lower now, almost to himself. "We missed it." Lieutenant Brooks stood beside him, arms at his sides, posture still disciplined, but his expression no longer carried the same certainty it had at the start of the day. "We trusted the system," he said. It was not a defense. It was a realization. Kramer nodded once. "We trusted it more than we trusted ourselves." The words settled between them, simple and heavy at the same time. Across the tarmac, Bennett remained where he had been. His eyes still scanning the distance, as if part of him expected the old man to reappear, to step back into the scene and explain everything in a way that made sense. But he did not. Some people never do. They arrive when needed, and they leave before anyone can fully understand why. The sound of the jet returned faintly in the distance, a controlled roar cutting across the sky as it completed its demonstration pass. Heads turned again, tracking it as it swept back into view, fast and precise, carving a clean line through the air before banking away. This time, the sound did not bring tension. It brought clarity. The machine was never the problem. General Hayes paused at the edge of the runway before stepping toward his vehicle, his hand resting briefly against the door as he looked back once more. Not at the aircraft. Not at the team. But at the empty space where Eli had stood. There was no expression on his face that anyone could read. Only a quiet acknowledgement of something that did not need to be spoken aloud. He got into the vehicle without another word, the door closing with a soft, final sound that marked the end of something more than just a demonstration. Kramer watched him go, then turned back toward the team. "Document everything," he said, his voice steady, but different. "Not just the data. The sequence. The decisions." He paused, then added, "and what we overlooked." The technicians nodded, already moving, but with a new kind of attention, one that did not rely solely on screens and numbers. Brooks looked once more at the panel, then stepped back, his eyes shifting toward the horizon. "He saw it in seconds," he said quietly. Kramer shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. He recognized it. The distinction mattered. It always had. The jet sound faded again into the distance, leaving behind the steady hum of the bass returning to its rhythm. Vehicles moved. Radios crackled. Orders were given. But beneath all of it, something remained. A subtle shift in how they looked at the machines they worked on, and the limits they had assumed were fixed. Bennett finally lowered his gaze, his grip on the tablet loosening as he exhaled slowly. "Sir," he said, almost without thinking, "do you think he will come back?" Kramer followed his line of sight toward the empty runway, then shook his head once. "He was never gone," he said. The wind moved across the concrete again, lighter now, carrying away the last of the heat. The runway stretched out ahead, quiet, waiting for the next moment, the next problem, the next test. And somewhere beyond it, unseen and unannounced, the kind of mastery that does not fade with time continued to exist without needing recognition, without needing proof, simply waiting for the moment when it was needed again, because some things are not measured by systems or ranks, but by the quiet certainty of someone who has already lived the answer long before anyone thought to ask the question.